everybody. Thanks for clicking into this edition of Sit Down with Ed Brown. You know, we've talked to a lot of really good people, but today, as you can see, we got the legend, Mr. Bob Gimlin. Bob, how you doing, buddy?
Thank you very much.
When you were down in Bluff Creek,
Yes,
right?
sir.
Go ahead and kind of set that up for us.
Okay, Dan, what happened, allow me, folks, to kind of start back. This is, of course, way back in 1967, and I had known Roger for quite a few years of different things, and Roger talked to me about the Bigfoot thing, which I didn't have time to be that much interested in it, but then he kept playing little cassettes as we'd go out on weekend rides, and I didn't get to spend that much time with Roger because I worked. I had a steady job and actually had two jobs. But anyway, to make a long story a little bit shorter, Roger and I was over, he wanted to go over in the Mount St. Helens area on Labor Day weekend in 1967. So I had a truck, a nice horse truck with a van on the back to haul horses with, which I did often. And so we went over and in the Mount St. Helens area and rode a couple of days, or actually one day, and then it started another day. But it started raining over there all so incredibly hard that everything got wet. So I said, well, I'm heading back to go back to work on Tuesday after Labor Day weekend. And so we went on back to the Yakima area, where I live, and Roger lived about 33 miles from me, up called the North Fork or the South Fork of the Atanum. And I went back to work as usual on Tuesday, and I think it was I don't remember the exact time, but I think it was about 4 or 5 days later. Roger come flying in my driveway. Bob, he said, oh, you and I need to go to Northern California, down around the Bluff Creek area. And I said, well, what's going on, Roger? He said, hey, over Labor Day weekend, he said, they're blading new logging roads back up in the mountains there. And they put a piece of equipment there, and I understood him to say at that time it was a fuel tank that they spotted in there with a tractor on Friday afternoon, and was gone, of course, Labor Day weekend, and they came back on Tuesday morning to go to work, and there were 3 different sizes of prints, Bigfoot prints, in the soft dirt around this tank that they'd put in to fuel up the road graders and the cats, the dozers back in there. And so he said, we need to go down there and see these footprints, and because he had known that area at time had a lot of legends or stories about the Bigfoot, and that's where the Bigfoot name started, with Jerry Crew and a crew back then. And I had never met Jerry Crew, but that's where the name Bigfoot had started. So that being, I said, well, I can't just leave my job, and I had cattle and horses and quite a bit of stuff to take care of. So I said, I've got to make arrangements to be able to do this. So I went in and talked to my boss, and beings it was in September, he said, well, yeah, he said, by October, Bob, we're going to be, I was hot roofing. If anybody knows when I'm talking to this about hot roofing, it's limited to your summer months, basically. And so he said, yeah, being you're the last man hired on the crew, you'll be the first man laid off, which made sense to me.
Sure.
There was no question about it. So I was going to be laid off in the winter and do something else, find another job. So he said, yeah, if you want to take off. I said, I'm only going to be gone a week or two, assuming that I'd only be gone a couple of weeks.
Right.
So I said, well, Roger, you get stuff together, and I'll get somebody to take care of my cattle and my horses, because my wife worked all the time. She couldn't do it. So I got talking to friends of mine, and we got the cattle out. I didn't have a lot of cattle, but I think I had about I had 35, 40 head of registered Charolais at that time, and they were bred to calve in the spring. So I wanted to make sure that they had pretty good care, naturally, because I had a lot of money tied up there, and I had 33 or 35 head of horses and mules because I was packing at that time also. But anyway, I won't go into that phase of it
Sure,
because it's going to
sure.
take forever about the packing trips and that.
Right.
So I got my truck ready to go, and Roger got the animals lined up to go. And I can't remember exact what day we left, but I think it was the last couple of days in September. And so we get down there around the 1st of October. It had to be the 1st or the last day of September, the 1st of October. Well, it was it was kind of a dry fall, really, but it was a real open, nice fall, you know. And we rode many, many miles around on the horses, and even got up on these dirt roads looking for tracks to cross the road.
Sure.
After they'd quit working on them at night or in the evenings. And of course, we saw all kinds of tracks of deer and cougar and bear and raccoon and a lot of different creatures, but not a Bigfoot track. And so we'd ridden so many miles, and we had ridden past this area that I'm going to talk about right here soon. We'd ridden past it a few days before. And so about midday on that Saturday, Roger said, let's pack up our gear and go about 25, 30 miles farther back in, where we might have a little bit better chance of finding some evidence. And which we meant by evidence was anything. Footprints would have been first evidence, of course. And so that would have put us a long ways away from the existing tracks. But I'll go back just a little bit. It had rained all up and down the west coast, and I had never seen a print to be identified it to put a cast into.
Sure.
So I was real anxious to see a print. By then I was starting to believe, there must be Bigfoot, there must be Sasquatch out there. So I really wanted to see these tracks, these 3 different sizes of tracks. And that was one of the reasons I was pretty anxious to take Roger down there in that area. Well, we got down there, and the rain had rained all the way down the west coast. So when I look at these supposedly was good tracks that they already had, some people had cast, I think Bob Titmus and a few of the professional people that was in it at that time went and cast them. All they were is you could see there had been a track there, but it rained so hard in that fresh dirt that they were pretty well wiped out. And besides, of all the people had come to view them, had walked around them and in them, and so I was pretty disappointed about the whole trip to start with. And then that riding every day, and I was used to riding quite a bit, so that didn't bother me. But I was anxious, so anxious, wanting to see something, that I kept going and going and going. And the days were fairly short. We were getting into October then, the first and second part of October, or the first part of October. And so that particular Saturday was a really beautiful, sunshiny Saturday, but by then the leaves in the fall were starting to turn yellow and red, and the oaks and the underbrush and along the creek. So we left out of there, and of course we were riding along, sunshiny day, warm, and Roger was riding in front of me, and he was occasionally filming me back, followed him, and then he filmed the side of the hills with all the beautiful colors of the fall in it.
Awesome.
And not thinking much about anything except getting back where we want to make a camp and then ride out of there for the next 2 or 3 days, or whatever amount of time that I was going to be able to stay there, because I'd already been down there over my 2 weeks that I'd told them. and I didn't have cell phones to call back then. It was
Sure.
before cell phone time.
Right.
So anyway, we rode up this creek bed, and the people that I'm talking to may not know what a downfall tree is, with a root system that had been the tree been washed out, and the root system was up in the air, and it stood about 10 to 11 feet up with the big roots, and probably 10 foot across. Well, apparently the creek had rerouted itself around this big downfall tree root system. And as we come up the creek bed, Roger riding in front of me, about 10, 12, 15 feet in front of me, and me leading the pack horse. The little horse we'd loaded all of our gear on to take back further, but we were not, I don't know why we were thinking, we didn't take a lot of stuff to make casts with and stuff. And I don't really know why we didn't kind of think ahead, but we were kind of tired from riding hours and hours and hours, and so and I wasn't into it like Roger was into it about making casts and all of that. I was just wanting to see a big footprint that I could say, okay, that is what I'm down here for.
Right.
So we come around this, Roger in front of me, and all at once his little horse really started acting up. And folks, I used to say his horse blew up. Well, one time I said that at a convention, a lady got up and said, "How many pieces?" So I quit saying that blow up thing that cowboys use. So I say acting up, rearing up and jumping around.
Sure.
Well, by then I could see I got in view of the creature. And it was standing up by the creek when I saw it. And it immediately turned and started walking away from us. And Roger was finally got his camera out of the saddlebag, and the creek was only about a little over a foot deep, probably 18 inches deep, and 20 feet across, or maybe a little more than that. But I'm making a calculated guess at it.
Sure.
Because we never did measure any of that stuff at the time, and then I was behind Roger, so I was riding a big stout roping horse. And the pack horse, of course, was jerking on me, and I just threw the rope free and let it go so I could control the horse that I was riding.
Sure.
And so I was sitting there looking at all this, thinking, well, these things really do exist.
Wow.
And and then I didn't know whether it was a male, female, or what. I didn't know what to be able to expect until later on, and they said it was a female because of the mammary glands and so forth. But anyway, so here I am. All right, I've heard about these things, never seen a footprint, didn't actually really down to earth believe that they could be there.
You hadn't seen any evidence yet.
I hadn't seen any evidence.
Right.
But right there is one walking away from me with all this muscle and body and stuff, and I'm sitting up on a 16-hand horse looking across at it, which I estimated it a few times, probably I was maybe between 60 and 90 feet from it.
Wow.
And that may be a little out of line, but anyway, that gives you a little bit of a ballpark figure where I'm coming from.
Sure.
So then they'd ask me, well, there'd be so many questions that people asked me about this. How tall did you think it was? Well, my height on a 16-hand horse is about 9.5 feet up. So my view of it walking away seemed 6.5 feet, or I knew it was pretty big, but had no idea that it actually was as tall as it turned out to be in the long run, which was 7'4" 3/4 inches as tall as she was. Anyway, to go on with my story, it kept right on walking away, and then Roger wanted to relocate because it was making kind of a big, not a circle, but a moon-shaped walk to go with the flow of the land, of the mountains and the way the creek ran there. So Roger wanted to get closer, so he said, "Bob, can you cover me?" And I knew what he meant, because we both had rifles in our saddle bags or scabbards in on our saddle, and so by that way I knew that I had to get across the creek, or was going to plan that I'd go across the creek, and I knew if I had to make a shot, if it come back at me, I was going to shoot it. But we had agreed not to shoot unless something was, or we were threatened by some kind of a way we were threatened.
Sure.
So this famous footage that you see on 352 is when I rode across the creek and stepped down off my horse, pulled the rifle out of the scabbard. I never ever raised the rifle up because this was all happened dramatically fast.
Oh, yeah.
It's almost unreal. Her steps measured 42 to 46 inches apart, and it didn't seem like she was hurrying at all, but she was covering a lot of ground quick. And so therefore, I wanted on the ground. If I had to make a real accurate shot, I wanted to make a good one.
Sure.
So I got down, and when I did, that's that famous halfway turn
where she
halfway
turns and looks
back.
right.
Yeah, it's on my belt buckle.
Yeah,
and,
right here.
Yeah, right there it
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
And they use it for all the commercials and everything
right.
now because it was open to the public domain. But anyway, and so when Roger relocated, it was going, it was almost, it wasn't out of sight, but it was going kind of around the deal there, and he was still getting footage of it. And so I could see that it was going to be going, so I wanted to get back on the horse, and I was holding the horse all this time and him moving around and stuff, and I knew I'd slam the rifle back down on the camera. I started to get on, and Roger said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I'm going to follow it." He said, "Bob, I ran out of film, and don't leave me here," because his rifle was on his horse, gone. And because he told me, I didn't know why he said that at the time, only the fact, because it kept moving away from us.
Right.
But Roger was thinking that there were 3 footprints down there, and this was one creature. The other two was possibly there close around in the woods.
Sure.
And I didn't know what he was thinking at the time until we talked about it later.
Sure.
So then Roger wanted to go catch his horse to get a poncho off from behind the saddle that he carried there, for rain gear actually, or whatever. I guess he mainly had it to get underneath it to put film back in his camera. So it took us a little while to go back and catch the horse up, and by then we didn't even worry about the pack horse because everything there was at hand that immediately we needed to get done, because this was in the afternoon, about 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, 2 days after my 36th birthday on October 18th.
Awesome.
And so we got that done. Roger got underneath the poncho, and I said, well, let's go where we last saw it and see if we might be able to see it again. So we went up that other tributary of the creek the way it went, and we didn't see nothing but scuffs in the gravels where it walked, and tipped them over and the dampness was up.
Right.
And we got up there, probably 450 yards or maybe a little farther, and we saw where it had stepped on a big flat rock with a wet foot, and there was half of a footprint on that rock, and then it apparently went right up to the cliffs and up on top of another ridge and mountain. And we found out later on from Bob Titmus that it traveled back down that ridge and apparently sat there and watched us do all of the filming of the footprints and the different things that we did after the sighting that Roger had got filmed back in the camera again.
Sure.
So we didn't know none of this, but people came down there, and Bob Titmus came down, and he followed the same route that we talked about, and he went up there and seen where it had sat there and had no time frame on it, but it had been there a long time. Mm-hmm. And he figured it had a view of everything right down where we had been.
Wow.
And where everything had happened. But anyway, so we got all of that done and left out of there that afternoon. And Roger wanted to get the film back to his brother-in-law in Yakima, which is a guy named Al Diatley. And so my truck was on the other side of Bluff Creek. We camped on the east side of Bluff Creek. And Bluff Creek was, less than 2 foot deep. Not much deeper than it was way back up there where we got the film site.
Right.
But it was a little narrower down there, so it tightened up enough that the water was a little deeper. And so I said, okay, let's get our stuff all through in the truck and tie the horses up, because we had to go into Eureka, or I get those two mixed up, Wairika and Eureka. So I guess it was Eureka, to send the film up to his brother-in-law. So we stopped at Al Hudson's variety store in Willow Creek, and Roger made a phone call to his brother-in-law, and I wasn't in there when he talked to him, and he also called the people that he'd talked to earlier in the years, I don't know when, about track dogs. And these people in Canada had told Roger that their track dogs would track anything that they put the dogs onto. So Roger wanted to get a hold of them and have them fly down with their track dogs and go back up where we started and then track it and see if we could see it again,
Sure.
of course, and get more film footage of it. Well, then we got over there, and I stayed in to pick up and napped a little while Roger was in there getting the film sent away. So then we went back to the film site, or back to our camp place. We got back there about, we stopped at the variety store because I wanted to cover the tracks. So if those guys got the dogs down or somebody wanted to come and see the track. So I went out in the back where he had kept cardboard boxes for his shipments of delivery stuff in, picked up a bunch of cardboard boxes, and I threw them in the back of this truck. And we went up there and parked, and we talked about this because we were both excited about all of this. Didn't know whether we still had any film footage or anything other than our eye view of it. And
Right.
and Roger didn't get near as good a look at it as I did because he was looking through the camera and I was looking at the creature with my two blues.
Sure.
And so we talked about it, and there was different things that we talked about because Roger didn't see exactly what I saw, and the smell was a little different than what my smell identified it as. And so then we fell off to sleep, there, and it was probably by 2 o'clock then. And it was a full moon when we got there that night up there. God, it was a beautiful full moon. Fall night, October fall night, full moon. And about 3 or 3:30 or somewhere around that early morning, I could hear raindrops on top of the canvas on top of that covered the back of my truck.
Mm-hmm.
So I could hear Roger was sleeping up. I got an overshot. This is from my truck.
Mm-hmm.
There was the bed. There was where you load the horses back there. Roger was sleeping up in the overshot, and I was sleeping down on the bed of the truck. And I was listening to this, and I got up and I shook Roger's foot, and I said, "We got to get up there and cover those tracks." But I had taken those cardboard boxes and put them outside that night so I'd have room for my bed and everything. And he said, he said, "Bob, it ain't gonna rain." He said, "It was full moon last night." I said, "Roger, it's starting to rain." And he said, "Oh, don't worry about it." He said, "It ain't gonna rain." So I laid there and it started picking up a little more, a little more, a little more. And I got up again. I said, "Roger, wake up." And he said, "What?" And I said, "We got to get up there and cover them tracks." And he said, "Don't worry about it. Them tracks, it ain't going to rain enough to bother them tracks. And the guys will be down here in the morning with the dogs." I said, "Okay." So I laid back down. And by about 5 o'clock, wasn't even daylight yet. It was coming down pretty good. I could tell it was picking up instead of letting down. So I got up, put my clothes on, was going to get up and break these boxes down into KDs so I could carry them on the horse up to the film site. I looked out there, and by that time the boxes were wet and they were just soggy messes. So I realized then there was not going to be any cardboard boxes go up there. So I thought, well, I've got to go up there, and if I have to cut pine boughs or whatever, I'm going to try and cover these tracks. And Roger went back to snoring, so I got the horse saddled up and I rode up there, and by then it was really coming down pretty heavy. So I realized immediately that something has to be done. So I looked at these dead trees with the bark still hanging on them, and I started pulling that bark, big slabs of that bark as wide as I could get and as long as pieces as I could get to cover these tracks. And I got quite a few of them covered.
It's very clever.
Well, it's the only thing I knew, see. And so I had no idea how hard it would rain or what would happen, but I thought they got to be covered because it's picking up all the time. And by the time I got back down to the truck, it was good daylight by then, but it was really coming down then. And I said, Roger, that creek has already raised 6 or 7 inches out there. I'm going to get this truck across that creek, and it wasn't 4-wheel drive, it was just 2-wheel drive dually Chevrolet truck. I'm going to get this truck across that creek, and you bring the horses across, and we'll load up, and I'm getting out of here because it doesn't look good to me. And by then the windshield wipers would hardly get it off fast enough. So he said, well, Bob, I don't think we'll be able to make it up over Onion Mountain because it's steep. He said, take that low road down. I said, well, I don't know nothing about this area, so you'll have to tell me which way to go. So we started down the low road. Well, he brought the horses across, and we loaded them up. And we started down the low road, and the mudslides were coming down off the hill and into the road. And I looked out there, and I could see a pretty good slide, and I thought maybe I can run through it with the truck. So I got out of the truck, and I ran out, and I just went into the very edge of it, about 4 or 5 feet, and it was almost up to my knees. And I thought, I'm never going to make that with a truck. So I told Roger, you watch me, and I'll back up. And by then, the creek was just turning and rolling, coming down through them rocks. Roger was standing back there, and I couldn't see in the rear view mirrors very good. It was raining so hard. So I thought, I got to be getting close to the edge of that creek. So I jumped out. Roger was standing there looking up the hill because there was a tree sliding down the hill with the mud.
Wow.
Still upright.
Wow.
And I said, I thought, and the back tires of my truck was that close to dropping off about 10 feet down into Bluff Creek where the water was running down a cliff. I said, Jesus, the horse is in there, and if I'd have backed up another foot, I'd have tipped over backwards into that creek, and we'd have been there. But anyway, he said, well, the tree's coming down on us. And I said, well, then the only way we're going to do is go over Onion Hill. Onion Mountain. So I started up Onion Mountain and got up there about 200 feet, and I was sliding back faster than I was going forward with the horses in there. And the tailgate for the horses was on the left-hand side that you had to slide it a little ways and drop it down, or slide it a little ways and lock it in. This side was solid. The other side, the right-hand side, was solid. So when I started sliding back down the hill, the back end of the truck slid up against a tree. Here's the tree, the back of the truck's like that. Couldn't get the horses out. There was no way you could slide that to get the horses out. So I didn't know what I was going to do. And the only other thing I thought about it, I seen a backhoe on top of the hill a few days earlier. And I thought, I'll go up and see if I can get that backhoe started. But I don't know. Otherwise, we're going to be right here. I ran to the top of that mountain in a shirt just like this, and that pouring down rain. I got on, I looked and seen that I finally got it started. It was a diesel rig. I got on the black smoker rolling out of it. Got it started, and I knew I couldn't do much with it without weight in the bucket. So I rolled as many big rocks into the bucket as I could get into it right quick like. And it had the hoe part on the back end of it, see. So I went down the hill, and just before I got to the truck, I turned around and back to the truck. Well, I couldn't get stopped, so it put a big dent in the hood of my truck. And I got started and they had chains and stuff on it. And I chained it to the front end of my truck. And I told Roger, you keep that in low gear. And he was sitting in there with the heater going. And keep it going as good as you can, because I don't know if I'm going to make it to the top of Onion Mountain with this backhoe or not, because I was going slow, just digging mud and going. And finally I got to the top of the hill, but before I got to the top of the hill, I went into a hypothermia condition, and I was free. I was cold from that cold rain, and everything was soaked.
Wow.
And when I climbed down off that backhoe to get in the truck, of course Roger had a heater going, I could hardly even negotiate getting in the truck. I was almost that bad already. So he had some lemons and stuff in a container thing there, and he cut a lemon in half and said, suck on that, Bob. And I jerked that wet shirt off, and he put a warm coat on me, and I started along the top of that mountain, and finally got myself warm enough to go. And I was going along the top of the mountain where this new road was being pushed along there, and I thought, oh God, I got a flat tire on that outside dual. I said, geez, that's all I need, because I wasn't going, I had that thing, and the floorboard was getting so hot through the transmission, my feet was already hot. Sure. And I said, Roger, step out on the running board and see why I'm having trouble. I gotta have a flat tire. And Roger stepped back, and he was white as a ghost. He said, Bob, don't slow down. He said, the whole side of that mountain sliding away on that outside dual. And I said, oh my God. I was afraid the truck and everything was going to roll off the side of that mountain down into the canyon. And it took me all day from the time I crossed that creek to get into Bluff Creek that afternoon. And I fueled up in Bluff Creek, and I said, I'm heading back to Yakima. Well, not knowing that the guys come down with an airplane with the dogs in it, flew in and landed at that little airfield, either at Hoopa or one of them little places there, Orleans or Hoopa or one of them, and they couldn't get back in there because of the mudslides. Of course, it was raining so hard it wouldn't do no good. They didn't get back in there for 2 days later. And I guess the dogs would not follow where the Bigfoot went. They'd go out a ways and sniff, and they'd go a little ways, and they'd turn around and come back and lay down and whimper, is what the story went. I never got the story. Roger got it because he called them. But anyway, so I drove all that night going back to Washington, and Roger said, I'll spell you off driving. Well, Roger fell asleep over there snoring. Okay. Well, I won't go into much more negative stuff except the fact that for the first 35 years I took so much ridicule about this. My wife was worked in a savings and loan institution. She worked on the counter, and she didn't know nothing about a Bigfoot or anything, or didn't even care about it, And so people would come in and they'd harass her, and she'd come home crying and said, Bob, I wish you'd have never got involved with that. I'm taking so much ridicule because I'm a sitting duck. They'd come in and they'd say, hey, Judy, that old Bob of yours, I knew if he'd ever see something like that, it'd be a female. And she'd say, oh my God, why are they picking on me that way? Right. And they'd say, I thought he was pretty good guy, but here he is coming up with something with a guy in a monkey suit down there in California. And so then I thought, but John Green asked me one time, Bob, would you do it again if you had to do over again? And that was before 2003. And I said, hell no, I wouldn't do it again. I said, I've took so much. Roger and Al's traveled with the film and made thousands of dollars, and here I am working every day to make my bills pay. And I was bitter then, and I got over that right away because, I said, I just prayed about it and said, Lord, just get this hatred out of my heart. Because, I at one time really wanted to meet up with Ralph and Roger, both, because it wouldn't have been pleasant.
Right.
And so, because the way they did, the way they cheated me out of it. And I'd go up there where they had 3 gals working in an office up there, and I'd go up and I'd say, can you guys get a hold of Roger and Al and tell them to get a hold of me? And they'd say, well, we don't know where they're at. They were lying to me because Roger and Al told them, don't let Bob know where we're at. Because they knew they had this guy traveling with them and kept saying he's me. So I'd put a squelch to that, and then I'd end up with some of that money they were making. The guy down there told me that they wouldn't take checks or nothing. Cash $20 bills is all they'd take. Or money, cash money, and it's $20 to come in and watch the film and hear the guy talk and say he's me, and then see the film footage. And they said they had big garbage cans on each side of the door, and he said they'd fill them full of $20 bills, and then they'd go empty them and fill them full again, and some of those big gyms and auditorium. Wow. So he said, Bob, they're making a lot of money. And old Al Diatley admitted to somebody, he said, and his business was in the red at that time. He pulled his business out and parlayed that into big business.
Right.
Sold it for millions. And he built a $27 million home in Yakima, the most expensive home in Yakima, which I should own. They keep calling it my house. But anyway, there you are and now I don't hold no grudge again. Roger died. I went to see him on his dying bed, and he rallied up and he said, Bob, I know Al and I cheated you, but he said, when I get well, he said, I've got the means now, and I've spent enough money to get tranquilized equipment, track dogs, 4-wheel drive, snow cats, everything. We're going to go back. And I said, yeah, right. He said, we're going to go back, and you and I are going to capture one. I said, Roger, just get well. We will do that. I knew he wasn't going to do it, so he died the next day. Oh, wow. But at least I had no more hatred on Roger, because his brothers asked me if I'd go see him. He wanted to talk to me. He could hardly even talk because he dying. Right. And I felt sorry for the man because he was quite a bit younger than me. And so I knew he was dying, and I just agreed with him, and I said, yeah, Roger, just get well, and we'll go do that. But anyway, but Diatley's another story. He's a I won't even go into it.
Sure.
But anyway, and then, one time the Colonel and I was on our way to, over to Ocean Shores, to a Bigfoot, it called Sasquatch Summit, I think. And so, therefore, my cell phone rang. And some guy said, are you Bob? I said, yes, sir, I am. He said, do you like money? And I said, well, sure, I like money. He said, would you like to make $1 million? And I said, well, yeah. And he said, well, if you'll admit, that was a man in a suit down there, and it was Bob Hieronymus, I'll give you $1 million. I said, are you out of your mind? I said, I've never made any money on this before. I've made thousands of friends. And I said, that to me is more money than $1 million or any amount of money that Al and Roger made on us. I said, that's more important to me. I've met hundreds of people that are true friends after 2003. And I said, no way. I said, what would I do with $1 million at my age? I was probably 78 years old or 75, somewhere around that time. And I'd already had open heart surgery and been broke up a lot. I said, I don't need no $1 million. Stick it. Very well. And I said, let me tell you something, mister. I said, it isn't as important what you do when you're here on earth, but it's what you leave behind is what's very important. And click. Well, that's.
He didn't even want to listen to the other stuff.
He didn't want, because I told him.
Right.
Won't happen, mister. And not that kind of words either.
Sure.
You see.
Right.
Because it just irritated me because some guy had come up with something like that, and I'd heard all this scuttlebutt about M.K. Davis talking about how I shot 5 down there and buried him with a backhoe, where no way you could get a backhoe down there to start with. You might if you helicoptered it in, you know, and then not smart enough to know that the sandy soil on the banks of the creek would recede as the creek goes down in the fall of the year, and because it had ribs in the bank where it was high in the spring and went down as it went down. They weren't even smart enough to realize that, and he called that backhoe tracks, you see. So I think, you know, there's an awful lot of wannabes out there,
Yes.
or whatever you want to call them. They want attention, or they want a little, maybe $1,000 story to write or something, and all it was trying to do was put me down further. And I just thought, I don't even want nothing to do with them. And one of them's right here in this camp at this time, and I treat him as if nothing ever happened.
That's good.
And the other one lived in San Diego, California, and she's dead. But they allowed a picture that he took of me, that I agreed to let him take of me, up there in front of my pickup, and it come out in Greg Long's book. And I could have stopped the printing of that book dead if I'd have wanted to. I'm not that kind of person. I just let it roll its course, because I figured it ain't going to go anywhere anyway. So I call him and I say, why did you let Greg Long have my picture? He said, I didn't. I won't mention the names. He said, I let the lady, she wanted a picture of you, so I let the lady in San Diego have that picture. So I called her and I say, well, why did you agree to let Greg Long have that picture? She said, I didn't let Greg have that picture. So the two of them were lying right through their teeth, and she said, the picture that's in that book wasn't the picture that this gentleman sent me of you. And I said, it's the only one he had. It's the only picture he ever had of me.
Right.
So how could he not? And I said, nobody else. If he sent you that picture, it was that picture. So this guy, when he was back there and M.K. Davis said that, then he writes me a damn bunch of propaganda about, I wish you'd tell the truth about this, Bob. And this man is right here in this camp right now as a speaker, and I won't put him down. I won't even say his name.
Good.
Because I don't shake his hand, but I speak to him.
Sure.
And I treat him just like I would any other human being. Because I'm not going to be there. I buried all my hostilities a long time ago. All I want is fellowship and friends like you
Absolutely.
guys.
Thank you.
And there is no money that can buy that.
Absolutely. You know, and I want to say that I think that says a whole lot for your character as a person, as a man. You know, I can tell you a lot of people would take $1 million to tell a lie. You know, well, a lot of people are telling lies without the money.
Yeah, but you got to carry that with you the rest of your life.
Absolutely. That's what I mean by character. Some people have it, some people don't, and you've got it.
Well, you know, Ed, I'm not trying to say I'm a good guy or nothing. You know, just like I got to saying, what you do when you're here isn't near as important as what you leave.
Right.
And that's what I strongly believe in. When I'm gone, I want Ed and Dan to say, you know, I visited with Bob, and he's a good guy. He's nothing special. He's just a good guy to visit with, and I feel like I'm his friend, and he feels like you guys are his friend. You see, that's what I want to leave. Absolutely. I don't want to leave nothing else. And I meet all these people, and I enjoy having pictures with them and signing autographs for them. If that means something to these people, that's all I want to do.
Absolutely.
Fellowship is important. God put us here on earth to be friendly and love everybody. And unfortunately, it got a little out of hand over the years.
Sure.
But, you know, that's what we're put here for.
Absolutely.
And when we have to answer to what we do, I don't want a whole bunch of red marks behind my name.
Right. Right.
You know?
Very good. And you know, and one of my favorite stories is when I had the privilege to meet you last year at the Ohio Bigfoot Conference.
Yeah.
I tell everybody, I said, you know, a lot of people are like, you know, wow, how was Bob? I mean, that's so cool. You met Bob. You know, I'm like, you know what? Bob made me feel like, even though we had never met, he didn't know who I was. He made me feel like the only reason he was there was to meet me, and that made me feel special. That made me feel good.
You were special.
Well,
Very special. You see?
well, thank you.
Well, no. You and Dan both are very special people. God put you here on this earth. You didn't just fall out of a tree. You know, God put us all here to love and care for each other. And if I can do a little bit of that and pass a little teeny bit of it on, even if it's just a smidgen bit, that's what I want.
Absolutely.
And I don't want to be no special person. I just want to be that person that makes that other person feel okay, that I'm okay, and they're good. They're as good as they think they are, or as good as their dog thinks they are.
Right.
You see?
Right.
That's what I want to be, as good as my dog thinks I am.
Absolutely.
And I have to work at
stuff.
it every day, you know, and it's not easy. It's not easy. But I enjoy being here with all you folks is my reward for what I went through in the earlier years.
Right.
You
Right.
see? That's
Absolutely.
my reward. Money? Hey, I've got enough change in my pocket to buy a hamburger or whatever, you know? And so that's all I need is a one of these bottles of water and a little bit to fill old belly and to be able to close these blues at night and go to sleep if I can, without saying, oh, jeez, I wish oh man, I should.
No regrets.
Yeah,
No regrets.
no regrets. And I got the most wonderful wife in the world. I'll tell you, she's put up with me almost 52 years of being broke up and tore up because I've rode bronchi horses.
Sure.
And motorcycles and, you know, anything. I used to be a fellow that needed or didn't need, but I didn't want to sit still. I wanted to be doing something. And some people call it daring. All I called it was doing what I wanted to do.
There you go.
It didn't mean that I was trying to prove that I was a Evel Knievel, which Evel Knievel and I were very good friends.
Awesome.
And you know, I've met some incredible people through my life. And it would take months for me to even mention their names. But Bob Knievel was even though he was a different kind of guy, a daredevil guy, and stuff, he was a very special person.
Yeah.
Because he had something that a lot of people didn't have, you know. And you guys probably already know all about that. But anyway, and you guys have got things that are very special. You're here. You're enjoying yourself here with these wonderful people
Absolutely.
that are out there. I look at all them tents along that line and I say, what a village.
Yes. Village. Very well. That's
What a village.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So many beautiful, wonderful people coming out of those village, well, I don't want to call them tents because to me it's a little village out there.
Right.
See,
Little huts.
yeah, it's a village. It's a wonderful village. Anyway,
Bob,
guys,
I'm going to tell you, buddy, it's been 100% my honor and Dan's honor to spend the time with you today, and we want to thank you so much for giving us this time.
Yeah.
And you know, we talked about your character. You're a legend, and you are, and you're also a great role model. Move all the Bigfoot stuff out of the way. Just you as a person, you make a great role model, and I hope more people are like you.
thank you, Ed. That means a lot to me.
Bob, it's a fact.
My
Right?
pleasure.
You are definitely my friend.
Dan, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Bob.
You guys allow me to come into your wonderful home and do this, and
We're glad you did.
we'll always remember.
Absolutely.
Always remember.
Thanks for tuning in to this one, Mr. Bob Gimlin. Are you kidding me?
Thank
We're
you.
out.